Hey everyone, and welcome to Bright and Early, the podcast for people building early stage startups. I'm your host, Brian Ray. I talk to entrepreneurs, product people, designers, and marketing pros to learn what works, what doesn't, and how can we apply those lessons to our business. My guest today is Michele Hansen. Michele is the co-founder of Geocodio, a bootstrap SaaS that offers hassle-free geocoding for thousands of customers, including the Associated Press, Amazon, Expedia, and more. Michele, welcome to Bright and Early.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for coming on. I first stumbled across Geocodio and you and your husband's work because you're an Earnest Capital mentor. So I was just kind of curious, what's that experience been like?
Earnest Capital fills a void in the market for funding options for bootstrappers, and something that drew us to it was we could have seen ourselves using something like it 3 or 4 years ago. We started Geocodio as a side project, nights and weekends, almost 6 years ago now. And it took from that point to 3.5 years in for us to be able to start transitioning to going full-time. So I went full-time first, and then my co-founder, husband, partner, and everything, Matthias, he went part-time 4 months later, and then full-time 6 months later. And throughout all of that, it was definitely difficult to juggle a full-time job, a full-time side project, and a family.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
when we heard about Earnest Capital and got to know Tyler, who runs it, and learned about their investment model and how it's so much more founder friendly than most of the investment options available, it really resonated with us because something like that would have been really interesting and compelling to us 5 years ago, and maybe would have made our transition to running our company full time a lot smoother and a lot faster.
Yeah. Well, so let's rewind then back to the earliest, the origin story for Geocodio. How did the idea first come about?
It came about because we needed it ourselves. And how we figured out that we needed it was we had another product we were working on the side. And that was a mobile app that would help you find grocery store, convenience store hours. So now you can just type into Google grocery store hours and it'll show you all of the hours for all of the nearby stores, and it's pretty seamless. Mm-hmm. In 2012, that wasn't the case. And you would have to remember which grocery stores were near you and then click 5 clicks deep in order to get to what their hours were on their website. And so if you needed milk at midnight or a coffee at 3 a.m., it was a little bit of a hassle to figure out what was open. And so we built this app that had that. And a key feature of it was you opened it up and it had a map and it would show you everything that was open. And in order to display that information, we had to geocode all of the addresses. So geocoding is the process of converting an address into its coordinates. And a computer does not understand addresses. It only understands coordinates. So every map you see online, whether that's a store locator or anything else, is using coordinates.
Okay.
So for the app, we needed 5,000 coordinates. That's the number of stores we had in the app when we launched it. And the problem was we could get 2,500 for free per day from Google, but we had 5,000 stores in the app with 5,000 addresses, and we weren't allowed to store the data. They have some really strict caching restrictions, and they still do. And so we were basically in this middle of the market because we could either get 2,500 for free per day, or we could pay tens of thousands of dollars for an enterprise contract that would give us 100,000 a day.
Okay.
And we kind of looked around and we're like, there's nothing in between, really. And so we built a pretty rudimentary geocoder for ourselves just to make that app possible, because it was pulling in about $300 or $400 a month in ad revenue, which was nowhere near full time, but was definitely helpful. And we wanted to keep it going. And as we continued to talk about the app and talk to our other friends who were developers about it, it turned out that a lot of them also had this similar problem with geocoding. And one of our friends was like, why don't you just throw a paywall in front of it? And then maybe, people will pay for it and that'll cover the hosting costs so you can keep it going and not have to pay for it and basically get it for free rather than paying Google $20,000 a year. And we're like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Like, would you just pay for its servers? That would be amazing. So we continue to focus on our little opening hours app, but we launched Geocodio as well. And we launched it in January of 2014.
Okay.
We had 2 tiny little DigitalOcean servers that it was running on for $20 a month. So our definition of success for it was that if it covered its hosting costs, so if it made $20 a month. And we launched it, and to our huge surprise, it was on the front page of Hacker News all day, which we did not expect. Though it's really funny if you look at our Google Analytics, because there's this massive spike on the first day that has never gone anywhere since.
Never been
it totally
eclipsed.
Throws off the scale on the chart. Yeah. And a lot of that traffic died off really fast. So if you're launching something, you don't have to be front page of Hacker News. I'll tell you that from experience. But anyway, so we really didn't have very high expectations. And a proof of that is that when we went to bill customers, so the way we decided to bill people was, we'll just roll up your whole usage for the month so that we save money on transaction fees rather than charging people for their API usage every day. We launched it around, I want to say it was around January 20th or so. And so come February 1st, when we're going to charge people, you had integrated Stripe and everything, but we actually hadn't written the billing code to charge people.
Okay. Did you say you had integrated Stripe?
Yeah, so we integrated Stripe, but we didn't have the script that would actually go and charge people.
Okay.
Because we just hadn't expected anyone to pay for it.
To start paying.
So we made $31 that first month. We were over the moon because I think after fees, we were a positive $8, which is amazing because it meant other people were paying us for this thing we needed, and we didn't have to pay for it ourselves, and that was great.
In the black on month
exactly
one.
that was our wild success. I mean, I made a spreadsheet defining levels of success, and the minimum was we have something we can use and we can keep our app running.
Paid for. Yeah. Right.
And then a moderate success was we break even on it, and then a wild success was anything above break even. And then from there, we continued iterating on it. We got so much feedback. I mean, we had hundreds of people email us about it because it was so clear that there was a need for this, and that there were a lot of other people in that middle of the market that we found ourselves in.
And were those hundreds of people that were emailing you? Is that purely coming still from the Hacker News list?
Yeah.
Or are we okay? All right.
Yeah, because Product Hunt wasn't around at the time. Mm-hmm. Product Hunt, I think, launched a week after we did. It was actually funny because I remember on that day with the crazy traffic from Hacker News going to look at Google Analytics at our refers. And one of was this thing called Product Hunt. And I was like, what is this? Like, I've never heard of this. And so we were on Product Hunt before Product Hunt was on Product Hunt. So that was kind of fun. But so all these people are emailing us and, saying, oh, like, this is awesome. Could you guys do this? Could you guys do that? Like, so getting tons of feedback. And a couple months later, we ended up adding a spreadsheet upload option, because it turned out that if you had a spreadsheet of addresses, your only option to get that data geocoded was to send it to this guy who would get it back to you in a couple of days. And people have said many times that, if you can find a business where people are emailing spreadsheets to one another, that's a
Yes.
really good business opportunity. I want to
Yeah.
say it might be Patrick McKenzie who said that.
I was getting ready to say the same thing. Like, this sounds like the perfect a crystallization of that example from McKinsey about spreadsheets and
Absolutely.
business models.
Absolutely. So, through all of that feedback, we continued iterating very slowly, working on it at night, working on weekends. And it grew very slowly for a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I wanted to ask is, like, what were some of the early signs that told you, I think we're onto something here. And so, so obviously, hanging out on the front page of Hacker News for a day, that's sign that there's interest or buzz, not necessarily signs that you've got a profitable business, though. And so, how soon? I mean, was it on that exact day that you're like, oh wow, yeah, this really can grow into something that we could go full time on, or was that not even on your mind? What was the evolution of that idea? Not only are we onto something, but this could eventually be our full time gig.
We didn't have that thought until I started considering going full time.
Okay, and how?
And
Around what timeline, or roughly, was that idea?
so we got an early sense from that launch that there was something really interesting to people, and there was a real
Mm-hmm.
need for it in the market.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't really dream that it would be something we could go full time on. It was never intended to be a full time job. For us, side projects were a combination of personal edification, of getting to exercise skills and learn new things that might be more difficult in a corporate setting.
Okay.
Just having total freedom for what we want to learn and do, and not really having any risk associated, and then making extra money, because what got us to launching, but going from talking about launching projects to actually launching projects, was when we learned how expensive daycare would be. So, so daycare is more expensive than state college in a majority of states. And where we lived in DC at the time, we're now in Virginia, it was $25,000 a year. And we had always talked about having side projects together. I'm a product person. My husband's a developer. You put us together and we make stuff.
Were you full time? Are you full time employed at different companies in those early days?
At that point, we were at the same company.
Okay.
So we met at work. We ended up both splitting away from there, working other places for a couple of years, and now we have converged.
Sure. Okay. Okay.
And so we learned how expensive daycare was, and we're like, we can try to kill it at work and get bonuses and get raises, but realistically, are we going to get an extra $25,000 in the next year? And the answer was no.
Probably not.
And so, we went from spending our weekends relaxing, catching up on Game of Thrones and whatnot for an entire weekend, to working as hard as we could. So we ended up incorporating a week after our daughter was born. And the Opening Hours app launched 2 months after she was born, 6 weeks or 2 months after. And when we're talking about we were putting Geocodio in front of our developer friends, there was one day when Matthias was on paternity leave and went down to visit some friends of ours at an incubator in DC called 1776, and put it in front of a bunch of our friends there and asked them what they thought. And so that was very integral to it, was, this would be amazing if we can just defray the cost of daycare. But we didn't really dream that it would be a full-time gig, and didn't really spend much time thinking about that. Instead, it was, this is great, but this could all go away tomorrow, because what if Google does this? What if so-and-so does that? What if something else comes into the market? There were very, very few moments when we enjoyed the gradual success we were having. And instead it was more of an anxiety of, okay, what if this doesn't continue? What if things break? What if this happens in the market? What if people decide they don't like us? What all of those things. And I think it wasn't even until we'd been running the company for a year and a half, and we actually didn't even take any money out of the company for a long, long time. We were just scared that it would go away, and so we just kind of kept our heads down.
So what did you need to do anything along the way there to mitigate against those existential risks from the market, or did you learn over time, oh, those are actually irrational fears? We've got we fit in a really good spot in the market, and there will be competitors, but we've got a decent moat here. Which of those two was it, or was it a mixture of both?
The concern about what could happen in the market and with our product was constant, and I would say is constant. At no point have I ever sat back and thought to myself that we have a great moat. Actually, I think we have a terrible one. And because geocoding, it's integral to the internet and to providing services online, but it's also a commodity. I tell people sometimes it's the equivalent of selling wood into the software industry. Everybody needs it. And so it's a volume business, but there isn't necessarily huge space for differentiation. Where we differentiate is on trying to make it easier for people.
Yeah. Like developer friendliness, great documentation, that sort of thing? Okay.
Exactly. Okay. So not only providing a better product experience and more affordable pricing, also making it easier for people to connect to other pieces of data. So there are people who are using coordinates to make maps, which is the most common use case. But there's also a lot of pieces of data that are only available if you have the coordinates. So, for example, time zones or congressional districts, that information is only available if you have the coordinates. So where we have tried to differentiate ourselves in an extremely competitive market is to eliminate steps in people's processes. So if you use any other service and you want to know, so you have someone's address and you want to know what their congressman's phone number is because you want them to call Congress about, let's say you run a nonprofit. You would have to first take their address, then convert it to the coordinates, and then take the coordinates and then hit one API that will give you the congressional district, and then hit another API that will tell you the congressperson's name and phone number. So you just had to go through several steps to just get that one end piece of information. That's all you care about. Mm-hmm. And we make it so that you can go from the address to just having the phone number, and you don't have to deal with multiple APIs with multiple terms of use and formats and things like that. But that's just a small example of how the business that we're in is very competitive, and we are constantly looking for ways to make things easier for our customers.
Yep.
But I don't think the geocoding industry itself leads itself to defensible moats. And I think that's why you see the vast majority of our competitors have really strict terms of use. So we're one of the few geocoders that will let you store the data in your database. Most will not let you store it. They won't let you manipulate the data. They won't let you use it for anything except showing it on their brand of map. And I think that's because it is somewhat of a commodity.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. So if you scroll down to the bottom of Geocodio or geocode.io, there's like a dozen, use cases like political and civic data, HIPAA compliance, real estate, teachers, students, academics, etc. Which kind of gets back to what you were just describing, which is part of your, it sounds like anyway, part of your competitive advantage or additional value that you're offering is that you have dug into some of these specific use cases and discovered what are some of the most common and most likely next steps that our users take with this data? Let's make that easier, and that's where your competitive advantage comes from.
Yeah, that's the niche we've carved out for ourselves.
So how did you go about discovering and uncovering those dozen-ish or so, and I'm sure there are more. How did you go about discovering those use cases and taking your users a step or two further in their workflow to save them time?
One of our most important values as a business, and what drives why we do this, is to be customer friendly and to build a product that is something that if we were the customers ourselves, that we would want to use. Mm-hmm. And part of that is talking to our customers a lot. And that means talking to them in support settings and in sales settings, but also finding the time to sit down and interview them about their process and learn why it is that they need this in the first place and what is the overall goal they're trying to get to. And that has been one of the most helpful things for our business, is being open to feedback when people reach out to us and saving it and categorizing it, and then proactively asking for it, and going out to people and saying, you're using this from us. So why? What is the overall reason you're doing this? We know that coordinates are not stamps. People don't collect them for the fun of it. They're trying to do something else.
Yeah, right.
And so what is that other thing they're trying to do? And what are other steps in the process they're taking? Mm-hmm. And where are they spending a lot of time or spending a lot of money, or they don't like a vendor that they have to use for some reason because of their terms, or how they have to use them, or
there's some annoyance.
There's some manual step they're doing. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So fairly often, I sit down with our customers over the phone, and just try to understand what are they doing, and where are they in that process, and how might we help them better. And sometimes people can very clearly articulate what those other frustrations are. So, for example, from past year or so, we've heard from banks and insurance companies that they need to get the FIPS codes for all of the addresses they might make a mortgage for example. And the FIPS code is basically the census identifier that you can use to connect across many different government data sets. And in order to comply with federal fair lending requirements, banks are required to report on all of the FIPS codes and statistical areas and other key data to ensure that they are lending to everyone fairly. Mm-hmm. And so we supply that data, and we have for several years, but we heard from them that they also need it historically, because they might have their loan portfolio from 2016 that has additional compliance needs this time, and they need to run the whole thing through at once. And so listening to them and hearing, okay, not only that they needed historical census tracks, but why, and what does their world look like, and what does their process look like right now, and where are they struggling in that process, and why is it difficult for them? And it turned out that the tool that a lot of our customers were using, basically the only other tool for this online, unless you buy a huge software package that does tons of other things related to banking compliance, was there's a tool the government has where you can enter one address at a time. Mm-hmm. And if you have a loan portfolio over 10 years with 20 million addresses in it, you're not going to sit there and do it one at a time. And so companies were building it themselves, or having to buy much larger software packages in order to do this one thing. So we're like, that's a good opportunity for us to come in, make this easier for them, eliminate some hassle in that process, make it cheaper.
Hey listeners, now's a good time to pause for a second and let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Transistor.fm. Transistor offers you professional podcast hosting and analytics. They host this podcast. I am a huge fan, and I'm not the only one. I just searched Twitter for recommend Transistor FM, and yeah, there are plenty of folks in here. Will King saying, I cannot recommend Transistor FM enough. The attention and care M.I. Justin and John Buddha put into their customers and product can't be beat. Totally true. Sammy Schukert saying, for hosting, I can highly recommend Transistor FM. They make distributing to all major platforms an ease. It goes on and on. Listen, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, look no further. Go to transistor.fm, and if you decide to sign up, let them know that Brian sent you. Yeah.
Make it more flexible for them.
Yeah. How did you confirm, or how do you confirm that one customer's use case that you're talking to on the phone, and similar to the one you just described, that if you go and build that for them, that it's going to be profitable across, some meaningful percentage of your customer base? How do you think through that?
You never know that. But you can do research with your own customers and research in the market. So, for example, if we're hearing from someone saying, this is something that banks are doing, and so, my first thing would be, okay, what is this they're talking about in the first place? I am not an expert in banking compliance, but someone can go out and figure out, okay, how many banks are there in the country? How many of them are the size of this customer that's reaching out to? Because a huge bank has very different needs than a community bank does.
Definitely.
Very different characteristics, the number of loans they're making, what their vendor relationships are like, how much they're relying on vendors versus doing things in-house. Mm-hmm. And also just understanding the broader need that they're looking at. In this case, it was compliance with federal fair lending requirements. And then also looking at our customer base. So saying, okay, how many banks and insurance companies do we already have who've, they've ever signed out or signed up, or they have sent us an email, they've expressed interest, can we reach out to them and say, we've heard from other people that there's an interest for historical census data. Is this something you also have a need for? Would you be able to tell me more about it? And if they say no, say, well, what do you need instead? How does this look for you guys? And just basically just try to get into their head as it relates to this process. Mm-hmm. You never know whether something is going to be successful. I think sometimes there is a tendency to try to gather lots and lots of numerical data to give yourself confidence in the form of charts. And I don't think that always reflects reality. And to an extent, if I can know, okay, I know that I've got a handful of customers who have a reasonably good lifetime value or potential for lifetime value here. Let's do this. And then we'll often find out that, there's this other use case for this that we didn't even realize. So for example, I mentioned that banks use census data. There is also a company that is an investor, and they invest in lots of startups. It's not Earnest Capital, but it's another investor, and they have an international network of companies and mentors and founders who they're always looking to connect. And I was talking to them about census data about a year ago, and they were saying how that they started using it from us so that they could see who are all of their startups and mentors and investors in the same city, and using metropolitan statistical areas for that. So basically to tell you everyone who's in the Chicago area, if they wanted to have a meetup for everyone, which is something that is difficult to do unless you have that piece of connecting data. So they are not a bank, but they also had this use case with, thousands and thousands of addresses at a time. And that's a pretty good customer for us. And so I find through an iterative process of interviewing and releasing features, we can discover what else people need. And I am always surprised by the breadth of customers that we have, and delighted to discover that there are niches within industries that I never even realized they're there, and that they're using us. Like I feel like I've come across buried treasure when I find that out, because it's just so much fun to learn about so many different types of businesses.
Yeah, so you said there, like through an iterative process of talking to customers regularly. You said before, like fairly often was the phrase that you use. So what? Give me a sense. Give us a sense for what is fairly often. How many customers a week, per month? Like what's your cadence there?
We have interview recruitment emails that trigger based on a series of actions. So I have an email that goes out. All this is through Intercom, which, for example, the first time after we charge someone, an email will send out to them asking to learn more about what they're trying to do.
Mm,
And so those emails will all go out on the first of the month when we charge our pay-as-you-go customers, which is
okay.
generally what people sign up for to start. So the first week of the month is always super busy for me because I end up having so many conversations with people, and sometimes people just want to email back and forth, and sometimes they want to have a call, and it really
Okay.
depends. And then throughout the month, we have other emails that go out. I also have if people cancel, an email goes out, and I might set up a call with them.
Yep.
The interviews are time consuming, and they can also be exhausting. So I think I usually aim for about 1 to 2 a week. And I try to have them be about an hour each.
Okay.
Um, Getting into someone else's head and focusing on really having that much empathy for someone else, it takes a lot of energy. And I love doing it because I learned so much about what they're trying to do. But it is, I mean, I will admit that it is
Yeah.
tiring because
Yeah.
it's
A
a
lot of
form of
emotional.
acting.
Yeah. A lot of
And
emotional
maybe
effort.
if someone is a natural actor, they wouldn't find it takes so much energy.
Okay. What
But yeah.
Yeah. So what percentage of folks take you up on that offer to hop on the phone or at least give some feedback? Like what's a good benchmark that listeners who implement this practice, as soon as somebody starts paying us money, we're gonna automate an email and ask for some time. Like what's a benchmark percentage that they should be able to measure and say, okay, cool, we're within range here, or wow, hardly anybody is responding to this. We need to rewrite this email.
I would say 2% is a
Okay.
good one to aim for.
Okay.
And I would say, let's say if you have 20 customers a month, if you can get two of them on the phone with you, who will talk to you for half an hour about what they're trying to do, you're doing really, really well. Even if you only talk to one person,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, of course, outside of a customer service or a sales setting, I think it's really important to differentiate those different ways of talking to customers because they're very different. In
What,
customer service,
yes.
someone,
Specifically, why do you make that distinction?
yes. So when you're doing it in a customer service setting, someone has a problem they're looking to solve. And usually they want to get back to whatever it was they were doing, whether that problem is learning about what your service does
Yep.
or figuring out why an error is occurring or figuring out how to implement it. Their mindset at that moment is that they just want to get this over with and get back
Yeah.
to what it was they
Fix
were
the
doing.
thing and let me get
It's
back to
not,
work.
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
the right time to ask them to sort of sit down on your proverbial talk show couch and learn about what they're doing. In a sales setting, people might confuse the empathy for trying to sell you things
Yeah.
and trying to use that against them.
Yep.
And so we definitely have times when a potential customer is talking to us and telling us about what their needs are and what their process is. But the way I comport myself in those settings is very different than I would in an interview. In an interview, in sales setting, you're trying to impress them and you're trying to get them to sign on, and you're trying to say, here's what you need, here's what we do, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
In an interview, it's all about them. And you're not trying to impress them. You certainly want to make sure that they're not trying to impress you, because otherwise you're not going to
get bad data,
a genuine reflection of what it is they're trying to do. So I will notice that my tone of voice is different in different contexts, that especially the questions I ask and how I respond to questions is very, very different. So for example, when you're doing an interview, if someone asks you a question about yourself or about your own experience, you have to turn it back onto them right away. You have to deflect that right away. Mm-hmm. Versus in a sales setting, you're building a relationship, so you might actually want to relate to them a little bit. It's just a very different dance.
Yeah.
And
makes complete sense.
Yeah, and it's hard to do those both at the same time. And so, for example, after someone signs up, and if it is something that we had 1 or 2 sales calls with, because we don't always, because very often people will just sign up and start using it and we never hear from them. But if we did, if it's, sort of an enterprise deal and we had a couple of phone calls with them, I intentionally wait at least 6 months before I try to reach out to them for an interview. I want to make sure that, they're comfortable with the service, everything is working fine. And then also that it doesn't somehow get confused as being part of the sales process. Because I think people rightly have a lot of barriers up when they are being sold to. They are, for very good reasons, more suspicious and more careful.
Yeah.
As they should be, as I am personally. And so in an interview, you want them to be able to open up to you, and you want to be able to say, what are you struggling with? And you want to be able to get an honest reaction back, and not that kind of awkward impress each other, courtship dance that goes on during sales.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll have a few minutes left here, but I wanted to go back and just ask a couple of questions about when you and Matthias made the transition from salaried positions into working on Geocodio full time. That transition is a challenge and a struggle that every bootstrapper wonders about, faces, stumbles through, whatever. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what was that, tactically, practically, financially, like, what was that transition like, and what advice would you have for folks who may be approaching that milestone?
Making the transition to full-time is such a huge decision. And there's so many different factors that you're thinking about. For us, there was the security that both of us were working on it, and both of us had full-time jobs. So the biggest concern that we had for a long time was health insurance, which is exorbitantly expensive in the United States.
Yes.
And with me going full-time only, that shielded us a little bit from that expense. But, because we have a family and because we are constantly scanning our competitive environment, we didn't take it lightly. I think we waited until our revenue was about 4 times my salary before I went full-time. I'd really enjoyed the company I was at, but they were going through a transition, and I decided that I wanted to leave regardless. So I didn't know at first whether I was going to work on Geocodio full-time or go get a job.
Okay.
And I actually interviewed at a couple of places. Some of them are really cool, amazing companies. And I would have worked with people I'd worked with in the past. And I realized as I was interviewing with one of them, that I was like, I just can't get as excited about this as I can about working on Geocodio. And that doesn't really seem fair. Because I in that position specifically, my manager would have been an old manager I'd had who was a great manager, and I really liked her a lot. And I was, getting off the phone with the VP of the department, and at this well-known brand name remote company, and was like, wow, like if I am getting off that call right now, and as we talk about business, I think about what we're doing in Geocodio rather than what I would do as a member of that organization, that really says something to me. But it took me about a month of working through this and just kind of doing basic maintenance work on Geocodio, and Marie Kondoing the house, to think through what I wanted to do, because it was so scary.
Yeah.
Because, I think especially as a parent, there is this obligation that, this is not the time in your life to take risks, was how I felt, that, I need to make the decisions that are the most stable for our family rather than the ones that are the most personally edifying. Mm-hmm. And I felt that way very strongly, that I would be irresponsible as a parent to do the thing that would make me happier. Mm-hmm. And as I talked through this with people I knew, they pointed out to me that, you'll be a better parent if you're doing something that makes you happy. So maybe that, your revenue is, not the exact fixed line that a twice a month salary check would be, but you'll probably be a happier person and a better and a more engaged parent if you're doing something that makes you happy. And if you're doing something that makes you happy, your potential to make more money and to turn it into something very stable is higher. And that was really hard advice for me to hear. But I'm glad I had good people around me to tell that, because that ended up being the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that and on all that you've been doing with Geocodio. Michele, how can listeners find and follow you online?
So I'm on Twitter. It's probably the best way to interact with me. And like many of us, I probably spend too much time on Twitter. I always love talking to people who are getting their own businesses going and trying to get it off the ground or make it grow. I love talking about customer interviews and spreading the gospel of talking to your customers. I think it's so valuable. It was revelatory for me as a product manager when I learned how to interview customers. And I think it's something that every bootstrapped entrepreneur should know how to do. So if you just find me on Twitter, MJW Hansen, and we can tweet about business, life, sports, other things. I also, we try to go to MicroConf. So we went last year for the first time, and it was such an amazing experience. It's a really great community. Some excellent speakers. Well, I also had the opportunity to give a short attendee talk. So I'm talking about the other speakers.
I'm sure yours was great.
MicroConf is a fantastic experience, and they have a version for people who are already full-time, and then a version for people who are getting something off the ground. And so if you are listening and you're going to be at MicroConf next year, we are doing our best to try to make it next year. And would love to talk to you.
Sweet. Yeah. I have not been, yet, but
you should go.
I have blocked it out on my calendar, this upcoming year. I definitely want to be there. So, I'll look forward to meeting you in person, if we both make it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Excellent. My guest today has been Michele Hansen. Michele, thank you once again so much for everything you've shared.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Alrighty, my friends. Got a hot mug of tea here with me, ready to do some closing thoughts. And that was a really great. I really enjoyed hearing about their business and their journey through it. Just always so fascinating to me. These what seem like crazy niche businesses that are completely supporting a family and, giving someone a job that they really enjoy doing. And, who would have known, geocoding information. Super, super interesting. And I mean, what a perfect example of replacing a workflow of people passing spreadsheets back and forth, right? One thing that I think is really fascinating and interesting about the way that they have gone about growing their business, and even though Michele is, saying that their defensive moat, she's still a little bit nervous about it. I think it's interesting the way they've gone about it to offer really great user experiences to those, couple dozen or so use cases, specific niches, specific industries, and that they're delivering an amazing user experience on an API. So I like that idea. Usually we think about fantastic user experiences being like a really nice UI with, beautiful transitions that last just the right amount of time and delight the eye in just the right way. But instead, what they are doing is that they are saving their customers a couple of additional next steps through the delivery of their data, which they've done through customer interviews, through knowing their people, and getting them, and talking to them, getting them on the phone. What was the other thing? They also, they reduce anxiety by allowing their customers to store the data. So Michele mentioned that they're one of the only people in their industry that allows for this. That they are in a commodity market. And it sounds like many of their customers have responded to that through with a scarcity approach, of trying to make it really difficult for you, customer, to be able to kind of grab this and run. It's almost like it's just an untrusting way of looking at your customers. What Geocodio is doing is saying, we're going to reduce your anxiety. That, what if something happens to our service and this data that you've been fetching and that you've been needing is suddenly unavailable? Well, hey, you don't have to worry about that with us. Let us put your mind at ease. And so I'll link to it in the show notes, but there's something I'm 90-something% sure that I've mentioned it here on this show, but Bob Mesta and the folks at the Rewired group talk about the forces of progress, of push, pull, anxiety, and habit. When a customer is making a purchasing decision, those four forces are at play. So I will link to a talk that Bob has given on this, Bob and Chris, and an article that I have written about this. As she was talking there, that really just leapt out at me that, they have identified that in this market, people could have some anxiety because of the way that their competitors are behaving, and they have responded not by going along and doing the exact same thing, just the opposite, by being very open-handed and differentiating their offering in that way. That's a fascinating approach. I'm curious if that sparks anything for you. Let me know. Let's see. She talked about, saving and categorizing feedback from customers. That's something that has come up several times now in other conversations, that the idea of categorizing your qualitative feedback, analyzing it in some way and pulling those sentences out, whether it's somebody on the phone or it's through your customer service portal or whatever software, whatever you might be using, that as you're getting this, these streams of feedback from customers, to, pull quotes, put them into a spreadsheet, a Trello board, Enjoy HQ, whatever you might decide to use, to pull those quotes out, categorize them, tag them, so that you can refer to them down the road, that they don't just become some ephemeral conversation that you had with a customer, or that some interaction on customer support. That was fascinating. Let's see. And so in those conversations, she talked about getting to what's the thing that you're trying to do here? People don't collect coordinates for fun. Their customers do not want coordinates. They want to do something else. And so where are they spending their time? Where are they spending their money? What are they trying to get? What are they trying to get done? They don't want coordinates. They want to do something else. And so by digging into those next steps, Geocodio is helping their customers to save time, save money, make money, or make them happier in their job. Not just delivering not delivering data faster than anybody else, not delivering the most data more than anybody else, but helping them get their job done faster, more reliably, removing additional steps down the road. It was really helpful to hear Michele talk about that experience with conducting those customer interviews and their process, for sure, of kicking that email out when somebody signs up. I think that this is huge, and that the time to talk to a customer is after they have immediately hired or fired you. So after they've signed up or after they've canceled. This is like becoming pretty well recognized approach to which customers should I be talking to? Well, the ones who have just signed up or just started paying, or the ones who have said, you are no longer right for me, I'm out. Those are the people who have a very near-term experience that they can talk to you about realistically, without if you talk to somebody 3 months down the road about their purchasing decision, you're likely to get, some unintended, well-intentioned bias and reframing of history. It's not going to be intentional. It's just not going to be as valuable. So I guess on that note, I'll also link to this in the show notes. I've got a jobs to be done interview guide that if the things that Michele was talking about resonate and you think, I really need to try that out for my business, I know that I should be doing that. You can either just search for Brian Ray, jobs to be done interview guide, or just click on it down there in the show notes so you can read that article. I've got a couple of resources that you might be interested in signing up to receive. Hopefully that will help you out. If you need actual help, then hit me up and I'd be more than happy to give you some assistance there and see if we might be able to work together on that. I think that just about does it. As always, I would love to hear what you all thought. Was there anything from this interview that leapt out at you, something that you want to apply to your business? First thing tomorrow, you can hit me up on Twitter at BRHEA. If you're listening on Breaker, leave a comment on this episode. I'll check in on those from time to time. And until next week, thanks for listening.